Today we're going to be making a lemon meringue pie, starting with a raw pie shell. Now this raw pie shell that we're going to start off with needs to be baked first because the filling that we're going to be putting in is going to be baked on or cooked on top of the stove until it's completely cooked. So we need to pre-bake or blind bake the pie crust. Many different ways to blind bake a pie crust. You can either take a pan, an empty pan, put it on inside your crust, put it upside down in the oven and bake it, pull it out halfway, and then flip it back over and finish baking it. Today I'm happen to be using a method that I'm actually going to be using parchment paper and some pie weights. The pie weights that I happen to be using today happen to be rice because that's what I had on hand. A lot of places will use beans, but today I'm using rice. First thing I need to do is take a half piece of parchment paper and fold it in half, put it into my pre-fluted, pre-made pie shell that has not been baked yet, but has been well chilled. I'm then going to place this paper down into the pie shell, uh, making sure to press it all the way down around the edges, because when I put the pie weight in, I want to make sure that the pie weight, or the rice, gets poured in such a way that I'm actually up against the edge of the pie. Uh, that way, the edge of the pie, since pie plates have a sloped side, this will keep it from sliding down into the pie shell itself. So when I pour the beans, or pour whatever weights you happen to use, whether it's rice or beans or what have you, you want to spread it out to the side, making sure it goes up to the side. Don't worry so much about having the weight in the middle, but you want it to be up against the side. That way it holds the sides up. Uh, Now this then will go into a 350-degree oven, could be up to 400 degrees, but the main objective is to start to bake this pie very quickly, start to brown around the edge of the crust. That way the structure gets set before you pull out the pie weights. This could take 10 minutes, it could take 15 minutes. It kind of depends on the oven that you have, that you're baking the pie in. Um, just keep an eye on it. I would look at it after about 10 minutes, and then it may need a little bit longer. It just kind of depends on your oven, but keep an eye on it. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the pie. Uh, it should be done. It's starting to get a little bit brown around the very edge. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull out the pie weights, which is basically the rice, and I have a place to put it. So I'm going to pick up the parchment paper very carefully, picking it up, putting it down into my extra pie plate. And now we'll take a look at the pie shell itself. As you can tell, it's still not brown in the interior. The outside is starting to brown a little bit, but the structure set so it's not going to slide back into the pie shell. And that's the main objective. Put it back into the oven, and this may take 10 to 15 minutes. Depends on your oven, but you want the pie shell to be completely brown and beautiful all over and completely baked. If it's not completely baked, it's not going to be a very good pie dough for your lemon meringue pie. As you can see, I pulled this out. The bottom of the pie has browned very nicely. The edges are nice and brown, and it's baked all the way through. There is no raw dough being exposed any place, so I'm going to set this aside and start making the lemon meringue filling. To start off with the lemon meringue filling, basically I've got the dry ingredients in a pot, meaning the sugar, the cornstarch, the salt, and then I'm going to slowly start adding in the egg yolks, the lemon juice, and the water. Once I get that mixed together, I'm going to turn on the fire and start stirring it until this custard mixture actually gets made. Now, this is the same basic procedure that you would do when you're making, say, a lemon curd. You basically put everything into the pot. You want to stir it continuously. Now, this particular recipe, when you're doing anything with an acid product, use a stainless steel pot and keep it moving at all times. If you use an aluminum pot, you get a metallic flavor, you get some graying. It gives it a bad aftertaste, and it also makes it not look very pretty. So use a heavy duty stainless steel pot to do this. Keep it moving the whole time, uh, stirring it constantly. If you were to stop stirring it at any point in time as this is being thickened on top of the fire, you're going to end up with some lumps or what have you. So keep stirring until you start seeing bubbles to form around the outside. As you can see, it's starting to get quite thick. The bubbles are just starting around the edge. That means that the cornstarch is basically pretty much so gotten to its full potential as far as its thickening goes. So at this time, the pie actually looks pretty good, or the filling looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and add in the butter that it calls for. Just to finish off this pie filling to make it give it a nice smooth texture. It's kind of a cooking technique. You finish things with butter to keep it nice and shiny and smooth and velvety in its texture. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and once the butter is completely melted, I'm going to go ahead and pour that into my prepared pie shell. The pie shell that we cooked earlier is nice and brown. So we're going to go ahead and put this filling into the pie shell. Um, Once you get it into the pie shell, you're going to want to cover this just like we did for the chocolate cream pie uh, to keep the skin from forming because that gives you kind of a weird texture. So we'll pour this into our pie shell that has been fully baked. Making sure to get everything out of the pot because you don't want to waste anything. You don't want to leave any money in the pot. And then we'll go ahead and spread that pie filling all the way out to the edge, being sure not to go too far over the top. And it should be beautiful. Now we're going to take some plastic wrap. I'm going to place it over the top, and you want that plastic wrap touching the actual filling itself. Now, sometimes I've heard people put holes in it just to let some of the steam escape, but as long as you get the plastic wrap on there, it should be fine until you start to get through your meringue going. Our next project is going to be actually mixing of the meringue. Now, meringue basically starts off with three basic ingredients, meaning egg whites, sugar, cream of tartar, and a little vanilla. The main thing to remember when you're making any type of meringue is that your egg whites are clean. In other words, they don't have any egg yolk in it. Egg yolk contains fat. Fat hinders the ability of egg whites to whip. The next thing I'm going to put in there is going to be the sugar. Um, the sugar then goes in. Then I'll put in the cream of tartar, which is an acid, which helps stabilize the egg whites. And then this recipe also calls for a touch of vanilla. So I'll go ahead and incorporate that into the eggs. Now, initially, when you start mixing meringues, you want to start mixing at a relatively slow speed to kind of get things mixed together, get the sugar incorporated nicely, and get everything working. And then you can go ahead and increase the speed on your mixer to actually bring the egg whites up to a nice, firm, shiny, moist peak. Now, this takes a few minutes in the mixer. Uh, if you're using fresh egg whites, it generally shouldn't take very long, um, but sometimes there's issues. If there are issues with your egg whites not whipping or coming up to a nice peak, chances are either your bowl had some oil in it, your whip had a little bit of oil on it, something, and that will actually hinder the ability for the egg whites to actually whip. Once the meringue has reached its firm peak, you go ahead and spread it onto your pie, making sure that the meringue touches the actual pie shell itself. That way it doesn't produce a little island in the middle. You bake it in a 400 or 350 degree oven until the meringue is nice and browned all the way through. It has a beautiful color to it. The peaks of brown just a little bit, but there's a nice brown color all over the meringue. Uh, this way you're making sure that the meringue has been completely cooked. Um, if you're using raw eggs, sometimes this is an issue, so you want to make sure that you cook the meringue all the way. Once you get that done, you basically have a beautiful pie. Enjoy!